He was the youngest son, the least expected, the one no one noticed. David of Bethlehem, a simple shepherd boy, yet chosen by God to lead a nation. In a world ruled by strength, wealth, and reputation, David was quiet, humble, overlooked. But God's ways are never like the world's. The Lord looks at the heart. David's story begins far from the royal palace, among the hills and valleys of Bethlehem. He tended sheep day in and day out, with nothing but a sling, a staff, and his faith in God. While his brothers trained with swords and shields, David's weapons were patience, courage, and trust. Alone with his flock, he faced lions, bears, and the harsh realities of the wilderness. Each day was a battle for survival, yet each day shaped a man who would one day face Goliath and rule Israel. And then came the moment that changed everything. The prophet Samuel arrived in Bethlehem, under God's instruction, to anoint the next king. Saul had failed. The people had rejected him in heart, and the Lord sought someone pure in spirit. Samuel looked at Eliab, the eldest, tall and strong. Surely this must be the one. But God said, "Do not look at his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not see as humans see. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. One by one, the brothers passed before Samuel, and then came David, tending sheep, his hands rough from work, his face filled with faith. Samuel felt the Spirit descend upon him. In that moment, an ordinary boy became extraordinary in the eyes of God. The anointing was quiet, unseen by the world, but it marked the beginning of a destiny that would shake kingdoms and inspire generations. David returned to his flock, still a boy, still unnoticed by the people of Bethlehem, yet God had planted a seed that would grow into greatness. The contrast between his humble beginnings and the future glory of Israel is staggering. A shepherd boy, overlooked by men, chosen by God. This is the recurring theme of David's life. God lifts the humble, chooses the unlikely, and fulfills his promises through the faithful heart. As David grew, so did his reputation. It's not for being a prince or warrior, but for his courage and faith. The story of David and Goliath is the most famous, yet it began with a smaller, quieter faith. Goliath, a giant, a symbol of fear, challenged the armies of Israel. Day after day, the Philistine warrior taunted the soldiers, mocking their God, daring them to fight. Saul's men trembled and hope seemed lost. David arrived on the battlefield not as a soldier, but as a messenger, bringing food to his older brothers. He heard Goliath's words and felt a fire in his heart. This giant, this mocking idol, was not stronger than the God he served. David's faith was unshakable, his courage unbreakable. He went before Saul, declaring, "Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Saul doubted. How could a boy face a giant? Yet David recounted his battles with lions and bears, how the Lord delivered him each time. "The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of this Philistine," David said. Faith, he understood, was not about size or weaponry, it was about trust in God's power. With no armor, no sword, only his sling and 5 smooth stones, David stepped into the valley. Goliath laughed, mocking him. "Am I a dog that you come at me with sticks?" he roared. But David's eyes burned with resolve. "You come against me with sword and spear. But I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of Israel." And with one stone, one act of faith, the giant fell. David had done the impossible. This victory was more than physical, it was spiritual. It proved that God honors the faithful heart, that courage fueled by trust in him can defeat the greatest fears. David's faith was not about bravado. It was about obedience, about knowing that God is stronger than any giant, any challenge, any enemy. Word of David's victory spread. The young shepherd boy became a symbol of hope, an emblem of God's power. Women sang in the streets, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands." And while David's fame grew, Saul's jealousy deepened. The man once anointed as king saw the boy he once overlooked now rise in glory, and his heart twisted with envy. But before David could take the throne, he had to survive the envy of a king. Saul welcomed him into the palace, gave him a place among his warriors, but suspicion and fear never left Saul's heart. Every success, every praise David received was a threat to Saul's crown. David became a fugitive in his own land, constantly fleeing for life, yet never fleeing from faith. Even in exile, David's character was formed. He didn't strike Saul when he had the chance. Twice he could have killed the king, yet he spared him, saying, "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master." David understood that vengeance is not the Lord's, and patience in God's timing brings true justice. His humility in moments of temptation, his restraint, his courage, all of these, shaped the man who would become king. David found allies and friends along the way. Jonathan, Saul's son, became a brother in spirit. Their bond was forged in love and loyalty, a testament to God's design for friendships that transcend circumstance. David's men, a band of loyal followers, shared his faith, his hardships, and his vision. Together, they became more than a fugitive band. They became a family, a model of God's people standing firm in trials. The time of waiting was long. Years passed, and David grew in wisdom, strategy, and leadership. He learned to lead not for his own glory, but for God's kingdom. Every challenge, every exile, every battle honed him, preparing him for the throne. And when the time came, when Saul fell in battle and God's plan unfolded, David ascended not as a boy, but as a man after God's own heart, ready to shepherd a nation. David's rise from shepherd to king teaches us about faith, courage, and patience. It reminds us that God's selection is not based on appearance, status, or even age. He chooses the faithful, the humble, the obedient. Giants will rise, enemies will mock, and challenges will seem insurmountable, but faith, trust, and courage can topple every obstacle. David's story is still with us today. In every overlooked person, in every quiet heart, in every small act of faith, there is a giant waiting to be defeated. God calls the humble, the faithful, the steadfast, and through them, he changes history. David, the shepherd who became king, the boy who faced Goliath, the servant who trusted in God, styming his story is a reminder. No one is too small, too young, or too ordinary to be used by God. Giants fall, hearts are lifted, and history is rewritten by those who trust him fully. If David's story inspires you, remember, your courage matters, your faith matters, your obedience matters. You might feel small, overlooked, or powerless, but God sees your heart. Just like David, he can use you to accomplish the impossible. David was no longer the quiet shepherd boy. He had faced Goliath, toppled the giant with a single stone, and been anointed by God as the future king of Israel. Yet despite his victory and God's promise, his path was far from easy. The king, once anointed by God himself, now burned with envy. David, the hero of Israel, the man praised by the people, became the hunted. Imagine being pursued by a king, the very man who once held authority over you, now determined to destroy you. Every hill, every cave, every village became a potential trap. Every step could be your last. David's life became a journey through shadows and uncertainty. Yet in every moment, he clung to God. His faith was tested not in the safety of a palace, but in the wilderness, under the threat of death. Saul sent men to capture David. Some failed. Some came close, but David, guided by divine wisdom, eluded every trap. He moved swiftly, quietly, and always trusted that God's hand would protect him. Every cave became a sanctuary, every desert path a proving ground. It was a crucible, forging the heart and mind of a king. The wilderness was harsh and unforgiving, yet it was also a place of preparation, a secret school of leadership that only God could orchestrate. David had men who followed him loyal, brave, but weary and hungry. They were not soldiers of a mighty army, but fugitives, outcasts, and those seeking refuge. David's leadership was tested daily. Decisions about where to hide, how to find food, whom to trust, and when to move were matters of life and death. Every wrong choice could cost lives, and yet David carried the weight with patience, wisdom, and a steady hand. His empathy, courage, and reliance on God shaped him into a leader capable of ruling an entire nation. The nights in the wilderness were brutal. Cold winds cut through him, the moon offered little comfort, and hunger gnawed at his strength. Sometimes he slept in caves, listening to the howls of wild animals outside. Other times he sat alone on a hill, the stars above a silent witness to his prayers. He prayed with intensity, composing psalms that were cries from his soul. These songs of lament, hope, fear, and praise were not mere poetry. They were lifelines. Reflections of a man learning to depend wholly on God. Each night, as the fire crackled and his men huddled nearby, David would speak words of encouragement, reminding them that God's plan was greater than their fear, that courage and faith were stronger than any sword. David's encounters with Saul revealed the depth of his character. Twice he had the opportunity to strike the king and claim the throne prematurely. Each time he refrained. "The Lord forbid that I should do such a thing to my master," he said. In a world where ambition and immediate action were rewarded, David chose patience, obedience, and trust in God's timing. His restraint was not weakness. It was the mark of a man being shaped for leadership by divine wisdom. Even in moments of extreme danger, David showed mercy. Once he entered a cave where Saul rested, vulnerable and unaware. The chance to end his pursuer was within his grasp, but he did not strike. Instead, he cut only a corner of Saul's robe, a silent message that he could have acted, but chose not to. Later he reminded Saul, "I could have killed you, but I did not. The Lord forbid that I should harm the Lord's anointed." This act was more than mercy. It was faith in God. It's justice and recognition that vengeance belonged to the Lord. David's time in exile was marked by betrayal, hunger, and constant threat. Some allies were loyal, others fearful or envious. His men suffered alongside him, enduring cold nights, scarce food, and the fear of ambush. Every day demanded courage, wisdom, and trust in God. Yet David never wavered. He guided his men, protected them, and inspired them to follow with hope, showing that true leadership was not about privilege, but about service, integrity, and faith. David's journey took him beyond Israel, into enemy territory. He negotiated with Philistines, navigated political tensions, and remained steadfast in his faith. Even when surrounded by idol worshippers and foreign powers, he refused to compromise. His courage was not reckless. It was anchored in trust and obedience to God. The Lord's protection followed him, guiding his steps. and turning precarious situations into victories, teaching him lessons that no battle in Israel could provide. These years of exile were formative. David learned the importance of patience, the power of humility, and the necessity of listening to God. Every hardship, every betrayal, every close call was molding him into a king who would lead not only with strength, but with justice, mercy, and discernment. His character was refined in the shadows, tested in ways that no throne room could ever replicate. He also grew in spiritual depth. David spent countless hours in prayer, meditation, and worship. He poured out his heart to God through psalms, seeking guidance, comfort, and strength. Each psalm was a reflection of his journey from fear and despair to hope and praise. They became his armor and his voice, connecting him to God and inspiring generations to come. Reliance on God was total. His victories and escapes were reminders that divine providence, not human cunning, was his true safeguard. David's encounters with Saul were tense and fraught with emotion. The moments when David could have struck Saul, the king, were charged with adrenaline and fear. He stood in the shadows of the cave, the king's sleeping form just steps away, the weight of the opportunity pressing upon him, and yet he acted with restraint and reverence. Every choice he made, every act of mercy, was shaping his heart to rule wisely and justly. David's exile also brought unexpected alliances and unlikely friendships. Some of the Philistines, impressed by his skill and leadership, offered temporary protection. Others, like Jonathan, Saul's son and David's closest friend, risked everything to warn him, strengthen him, and remind him of God's promise. These relationships were not only practical, they were life-saving, weaving a tapestry of faith, courage, and human loyalty that carried David through the darkest hours. Through all of this, David never lost sight of God's promise. He knew he was chosen to be king, yet he also understood that timing and obedience were crucial. Acting prematurely could ruin everything God intended. His faith was tested daily, not in moments of glory, but in the uncertainty of exile, the fatigue of running, and the vulnerability of hiding. He learned that true faith is not passive. It is active, persistent, and trusting, even when outcomes seem impossible. Eventually, the day came when Saul fell in battle. The path to the throne was finally clear. But David's years in the wilderness had not been wasted. They had been his preparation. He had learned leadership through trial, mercy through restraint, patience through suffering, and faith through adversity. The shepherd, the poet, the fugitive, the faithful servant, was ready to lead a nation. His reign would be tempered by mercy, strengthened by hardship, and guided by unwavering devotion to God. David's story shows that even in exile, even when hunted, even in moments of fear and uncertainty, God's plan is unfolding. The faithful will rise, the humble will be exalted, and the patient will inherit the promise. His life demonstrates that trials are not just obstacles, they are shaping fires. Every betrayal, every danger, every challenge was a thread in the tapestry of God's design. For those watching today, David's journey is a reminder that our own trials are not meaningless. Patience, integrity, and faith matter. The God who guided David, who protected him from Saul, shaped him in the wilderness, can guide us through our own wilderness moments. Our fears, our enemies, our struggles, they are not the end. They are preparation. They are refining fires that make us ready for what God has promised. David, the fugitive, the faithful servant, the man after God's own heart, teaches that courage is not the absence of fear, but action in spite of it. Leadership is not about power, but service. Faith is not only for triumphs, but for trials. And God's timing, like David's, is perfect. The shepherd who became king reminds us that even in darkness, there is light. Even in danger, there is protection. And even in exile, there is purpose. When David finally ascended the throne, he brought with him more than victory. He brought wisdom forged in hardship, mercy honed in danger, and faith strengthened in the wilderness. He knew that God's hand was guiding him, and that his heart aligned with God was invincible. He had learned to trust, to obey, and to lead with both courage and compassion. So remember David the shepherd, the fugitive, the faithful servant, the man after God's own heart. Let his story inspire you to trust God in your own trials, to act with integrity even when unseen, and to walk in patience, faith, and courage. Your challenges are preparation. Your struggles are shaping you, and your faithfulness can move mountains, change lives, and fulfill the purpose God has placed in your life. The warrior who became a king. David of Bethlehem, once a boy with a sling and a harp now, walked through the gates of Hebron as Israel's chosen ruler. The people who once sang of his victories now placed a crown upon his head. But the throne of Israel was not secure. The tribes were divided, loyalties uncertain, scars of Saul's reign still fresh. Becoming king was not the end of David's trials. It was the beginning of greater ones. His first act revealed his wisdom. Not Hebron, not Gibeah. He chose Jerusalem, a city not claimed by Judah or the northern tribes. Neutral, central, strategic. But it was also a fortress of the Jebusites. They mocked him from the walls. "You will not come in here," they shouted. "Even the blind and the lame can ward you off." But David's men found a way through the water shaft. stronghold fell, and Jerusalem became the city of David, a throne built not only on conquest but on vision. From there, David turned his eyes to God. The Ark of the Covenant, long separated from the heart of Israel, would come to Jerusalem. The first attempt ended in tragedy. Uzzah, reaching out to steady the ark, fell dead at God's hand. Fear gripped David. He left the ark in the house of Obed-Edom, unsure if he dared bring it closer. But when blessing poured upon that household, David tried again. This time, he came not with presumption, but with sacrifice and worship. The streets of Jerusalem erupted. Priests blew trumpets. Levites lifted their voices. David, clothed in a linen ephod, danced with all his might before the Lord. He forgot his crown, his dignity, his title, became again the shepherd who sang under the stars. His wife Michal watched with contempt from a window, shamed by his abandon. But David's answer was simple. It was before the Lord. I will become even more undignified than this. Jerusalem was not only Israel's capital, it became the dwelling place of God's presence. But kings are not immune to shadows. One evening, while armies fought in Ammon, David remained in Jerusalem. From his rooftop he saw her Bathsheba bathing in the night. Desire stirred. He summoned her. She came, and soon word returned. She was with child. Panic, cover-ups, lies. He summoned Uriah, her husband, back from war. Go home, David urged, but Uriah refused. How could he enjoy comfort while his brothers slept in tents on the battlefield? Desperation darkened David's heart, sent orders sealed with the king's hand. Place Uriah in the front lines, then withdraw. The loyal soldier fell, betrayed by the king he served. David thought the matter hidden. A widow mourned. A child would be born. But the Lord had seen. One day the prophet Nathan came to the palace, told a story of a rich man who stole a poor man's only lamb. David's anger flared. The man who did this deserves to die. Nathan's eyes pierced him. You are the man. Silence filled the throne room. David's heart broke beneath the weight of guilt. He wept, confessed, begged for mercy. Against you and you only have I sinned. Forgiveness was given, but the sword would not depart from his house. Tragedy followed. A child born to Bathsheba died. His household splintered. His son Amnon defiled his sister Tamar. Absalom, Tamar's brother, burned with fury. He waited. He plotted. And he struck killing Amnon in vengeance before fleeing in exile. David's family was unraveling, judgment echoing through his bloodline. Years passed. Absalom returned, reconciled in form but not in heart. He stood at the city gates, whispering to the people, winning their favor. If only I were judge in the land, he said. Slowly, he stole their loyalty. Then came the revolt. Absalom declared himself king. Trumpets sounded across Israel. The people rose against David. Once again, the shepherd king fled into the wilderness. Barefoot, weeping, he crossed the Kidron Valley. Loyal men followed. Curses rang out from Saul's kinsmen, hurling stones as the fallen king walked in humiliation. But David did not strike back. Leave him, he said. Perhaps the Lord will see my distress. The fugitive king returned to the caves where his journey began. He set up camp in the forested hills east of Jerusalem. His army moved silently at night, through olive groves and over rocky ridges. Food was scarce and they scavenged from fields or traded with sympathetic villagers. His men were loyal, but exhaustion and fear wore them thin. They spoke in whispers around fires, plotting movements, guarding against spies, praying silently for the king to survive. David walked among them, listening, sharing their burdens, quietly commanding with a wisdom born of hardship. The army of Absalom followed. Skirmishes erupted. Archers loosed arrows from ridge to ridge. David's men fought fiercely, but the king avoided the front line, surveying from a hilltop, eyes sharp, mind calculating. He sent scouts into the night, reading the land as a shepherd reads the movements of his flock. And in the shadows of that forest, the king remembered the boy he had been alone, terrified, facing Goliath and how the Lord had delivered him then as now. Absalom rode proudly, his long hair flowing, the symbol of his vanity and rebellion. He pushed too far into the forest. His horse stumbled. His mane caught on a low-hanging branch. He was lifted, suspended, helpless. Wabe and the generals seized the moment. A spear struck true. Absalom fell. Silence followed. The battle ended before it truly began. When the news reached David, he wept openly. The wailing echoed across the hills. "Oh, my son Absalom, my son Absalom. If only I had died instead of you." His grief swallowed the victory.
Yes.
His men bowed their heads, uncertain how to comfort a king who mourned more for a son than a crown. David returned to Jerusalem. The gates opened and people crowded the streets, whispering, cheering, trembling. He walked through the city, the weight of a king, the sorrow of a father, the vigilance of a soldier, all combined in a single man. He met officials, generals, priests, and villagers alike. He spoke little at first, listening, observing, measuring the loyalties and murmurs that ran through the city. Over time, he re-established order. Tribes once suspicious now came together. Laws were reinforced, taxes collected, border defenses strengthened. Ambassadors from neighboring nations sought audiences, and David received them. Speaking with authority, tempered by experience, the palace halls that once echoed with fear now carried the weight of strategy and careful planning. The plans for the temple took shape, though David would never see it built. He gathered gold, stone, and cedar, sending artisans to prepare designs. The Levites practiced rituals, priests rehearsed ceremonies. Every corner of Jerusalem, from the battlements to the marketplaces, whispered of preparation, devotion, and hope. Even in later years, old age crept in, hair-grayed steps slowed, yet the harp still sang. Psalms poured forth, words that would outlive empires and generations. Joy, sorrow, guilt, triumph, they mingled in every melody. Soldiers and citizens alike paused to listen, hearts stirred by the depth of feeling, the intimacy of a king who sang not for vanity, but for God. David's lineage would extend beyond his lifetime. Solomon, wise and prosperous, would build the temple. Generations later, another king, the son of David, would walk the earth not with sword, but with sacrifice, fulfilling the promises made long ago. David's life had not been simple. It was a journey through fire and shadow, from shepherd to fugitive, from warrior to king. His triumphs were hard-won, his losses were deep. And yet every moment, every trial, every victory, every grief became part of the story of Israel. The shepherd who became king carried the wilderness in his heart, the battles in his hands, and the songs of God in his soul. And so, the gates of Jerusalem opened, and David entered once more. We walk not only as king, but as a man forged by life, tempered by hardship, and preserved by the hand of God.